Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here. This is a calm, long-form Diablo 4 endgame guide. There is no rush in here, no hype, no shouting. Just a slow, structured explanation of what matters and just as importantly, what doesn't. You don't need to focus intensely on every word. You don't need to keep your eyes on the screen the entire time. You can watch this actively, or you can let it play quietly in the background on your TV or smartphone, even while you relax, rest, or are about to fall asleep. This video is built with chapters. That means you can always come back later. You can pause, you can rewind, you can skip ahead, and if you drift off at some point, that's perfectly fine. But now, let's talk honestly for a moment. Most players don't struggle with the Diablo 4 endgame because it's too hard. They struggle because it's too noisy. There are too many activities, too many systems, too many timers pulling at your attention, right? Nightmare dungeons, the pit, the tower, infernal hordes, hell tides, whispers, bosses, paragon gear, crafting, masterworking, you name it. All of these things exist at the same time, and the game does a very good job of constantly reminding you of that fact. So, what usually happens? You log in, you do something, then you do something else, then you go back to town, then you check your inventory, then you compare two items that are almost the same, then you re-roll a stat, then you remember something else you wanted to do, and before you know it, your play session is over. You played, you were active, you were busy, somehow. But when you log out, you are not sure what you actually accomplished. Maybe you ran a dungeon or two, maybe you did a few waves of an activity, maybe you spent 15 minutes in town comparing boots that you'll replace tomorrow anyway. And the worst feeling is this: you don't feel weak, but you don't feel stronger either. You feel busy, but not really rewarded. Let me tell you something, that feeling is not a personal failure. Even if it feels like that sometimes. It's not because you are bad at the game, it's not because you picked the wrong class or build, and it's not because you are missing some secret formula or trick. It is a process problem, and that's important, because process problems can be fixed. Today we are not fixing this with 10 fast tips, best builds right now, do this before it's patched, or something like that. Those videos of course have their place, but they don't solve the deeper issue long term. Instead, we are fixing this with a philosophy, a mindset shift, a way of thinking about the endgame that makes decisions easier, sessions clearer, and progress more consistent, especially when you only have limited time. Because if your philosophy and your mindset is wrong, the game will always feel messy, even if your character is powerful. Even if your gear is good, and even if your build works perfectly fine. So here's the promise of this video. After watching or listening to this guide, you will know how to decide what to do when you log in, each and every time. You will know how to choose activities intentionally. You will stop wasting time on things that feel productive, but really aren't. And your endgame sessions will feel more impactful and more meaningful. And paradoxically, that's how progress becomes faster and more efficient over time. Before we go any deeper, we need one foundational idea. One simple concept that everything else builds on. In a Diablo 4 endgame, everything is a machine. Every activity is a machine. Think of it, you put time in and you get something out, right? That something might be glyph power, experience, resources, gear, or any kind of progress. Or sometimes, or oftentimes, frustration. But nothing is random in its purpose. Each machine is designed to give you a specific output. The problem starts when you use the wrong machine for the wrong job. And this leads us to an important shift in thinking. Your job in the endgame is not to do everything. Your job is not to clear every activity, your job is not to chase every timer, and it's also not to keep up with everyone else. Your job is to choose the right machine for what your character needs right now in the present moment. And throughout this entire video, we will come back to a single grounding question. What does my character need right now? Not what you could do, not what your friend is doing, not what a timer on the map is telling you, but right now. This one question cuts through the noise better than any guide ever could. Once you learn to answer it calmly and intentionally for yourself, the endgame stops feeling overwhelming. It becomes structured, predictable, and almost peaceful, I would say. And from that place on, progress happens naturally. So, with that foundation in place, let's go on and define the important question. What does endgame even mean? Chapter 1. What endgame really is. People talk about endgame like it's one thing. Like a single mode, a single activity, or a single moment where the real game begins. But this idea is misleading in my opinion. Because the endgame is not a destination, it's not a place you arrive at, it's not a finish line, and it's not something you ever truly complete. The endgame is a loop that repeats and slowly refines your character over time. We all know that, and still we somehow don't understand it every time, right? But once you understand that, a lot of frustration simply will disappear. A loop means repetition, and repetition often has a bad reputation. People associate repetition with boredom, with grind, with doing the same thing over and over and over again without meaning. But repetition is not the problem. Unclear repetition is. The endgame loop works when you understand why you are repeating something. When you don't understand the purpose, repetition feels pointless. When you do understand it, repetition becomes progress. So let's simplify the endgame as much as possible. At its core, the Diablo 4 endgame revolves around 3 goals, repeated forever in different proportions. They are pretty simple. First, become stronger. Second, become more efficient. And third, learn when to stop pushing and start farming. The third one is the most important one, and also the one most players ignore in my opinion. Because learning when to stop is not intuitive. The game constantly encourages you to push further, for higher tiers, more difficulty, more challenge. But constant pushing is not really sustainable. A lot of players don't burn out because the content is too hard. They burn out because they force progress when they should be stabilizing instead. Let's talk about that point for a moment. There is a big difference between progress and pressure. Progress is steady. Pressure is constant. Progress feels calm. Pressure feels urgent. When you're always pushing, every session feels like a test. And tests, to be honest, are exhausting, right? The endgame becomes much healthier when you allow yourself to alternate between pushing phases and farming phases. Ignoring that rhythm is one of the fastest ways to lose motivation in Diablo 4. Now, here is a truth that helps everything fall into place. The endgame has phases. Not official phases, not clearly marked phases, but psychological phases, you could say. And your priorities change depending on which phase you are in. So let's walk through them slowly together. Phase 1, my build functions. This is the phase where many players first reach the endgame. Your character is not perfect, your gear is incomplete, your defenses are sometimes shaky. But something important has happened. Your build works. You can clear content without constantly dying. You are not fighting the game anymore. You are not stressed every second. You can play, for example, at Torment 1 or 2 and breathe. This phase is not about optimization. It's about stability. Your main goal here is not to be fast. It's not to be efficient, and it's also not to push limits. Your goal is to make your character feel comfortable. If you skip this phase too quickly, everything later will feel worse. And a lot of players rush past this phase because they see other people pushing higher content very fast early into the season, and then you feel behind. But skipping stability leads just to frustration, because efficiency only works when the foundation is solid. So in this phase, progress looks like fewer deaths, smoother clears, less panic, and more confidence with your build. Those things matter for now more than the numbers alone. Let's go on to phase 2. My build scales. Once your build feels stable, something changes. You stop asking, can I clear this? And you start asking, how well can I clear this and how fast? This is the scaling phase. Now the speed matters, the consistency matters, and the repeatability matters. You begin to notice which content feels smooth, which content feels slow, where your build shines, and where it still struggles. This is where efficiency starts to become meaningful. Not because you are racing, but because efficiency reduces friction. And friction is what drains your energy over time. In this phase, you are no longer just surviving content, you are shaping your loop. You begin to choose activities based on how they feel, how reliable they are for you, and how well they convert time into power. This is where many players feel a surge of motivation, because progress becomes visible and consistent. But this phase has a danger too, because it leads directly into the next one. Phase 3, my build refines. This is the phase where many players get stuck at the end. Not because the game becomes impossible, but because the gains become smaller and smaller. Upgrades are no longer obvious. Gear comparisons become very subtle. Decisions become harder. And the main enemy is no longer monsters, it's more psychological. Your perfectionism kicks in. Decision fatigue, time waste. You spend more time thinking than playing, more time comparing than progressing. And if you are not careful, this phase quietly turns enjoyment into obligation. Most people who say, I love the game, but I'm kind of burnt out, are stuck in this phase. They are powerful enough to do everything, but unsure what's actually worth doing. In this phase, you are stuck at T4, where the open world content doesn't shake you anymore, right? But the sessions become messy, and the goals become unclear. And this is where process becomes more important than power. So, let's talk about why most players get stuck here. Let's be very clear about it. Most people don't get stuck because they lack skill. They don't get stuck because they lack gear. They get stuck because their process becomes chaotic. They do too many things at once. They chase too many small upgrades. They switch goals constantly. And this creates chaos. And chaos, as we all know, can be exhausting. The endgame does not punish weak characters nearly as much as it punishes unclear priorities. So our goal is not to beat the endgame. Our goal is to build a process that is calm, repeatable, and meaningful. A process that works even when you are tired, when you don't have much gaming time, and you don't want to think too hard. Because if your process only works on your best days, it doesn't really work. Here's something many players overlook. Two players with the same gear and build can have widely different progress. Simply because one has clear priorities and the other doesn't. Power helps, of course, but priorities multiply power. A clear loop with an average build often beats a messy loop with a strong build. And that's good news for you, because priorities are something you can fix without grinding more. So if we want a calm, sustainable endgame, we need a rule that simplifies decisions, removes noise, and gives structure to every session. A rule that works no matter which phase you are in, and that rule is the foundation of everything that comes next. Everything we have talked about so far leads to one simple idea. If the endgame is a loop, and if that loop has phases, and if chaos comes from unclear priorities, then our solution must be simple. And to be honest, it is. It's the core rule that quietly determines whether your sessions feel rewarding or draining. One session, one main goal. That's what we'll explore next. And once you truly apply it, the endgame stops feeling overwhelming and starts feeling intentional. Chapter 2, the one goal rule. One session, one main goal. If you only take one thing from this entire video, take this. Because almost all wasted time comes from too much goal switching. You log in with no goal, so the game chooses goals for you. A hell tide pops up, a whisper is active, you get distracted by loot, you check your stash, you reroll a stat, you open your Paragon board. I don't know, you remember you wanted to craft XYZ for whatever reason. And suddenly your 1 hour session becomes chaos. You did a little bit of everything, and you didn't move forward in any meaningful way. So instead, choose a goal that creates a measurable outcome. Here are some good endgame goals. I want glyph power, I want resources, I want to improve my gear, I want Paragon XP, I want to farm boss materials, I want to test and push my limit. Notice, these are all outcomes, not activities. Because if you start with an activity, you can still waste time. But if you start with an outcome, you stay focused. Let's imagine you have only 1 hour. 1 hour, for example, after work. You decide tonight is glyph power. Then your machine of choice is obvious. The pit. So you do the pit. You don't stop and analyze loot mid-sessions. You don't bounce to other content, and at the end of the hour you have progress you can literally feel. Your glyphs improved. Now tomorrow maybe you choose resources, or gear farming, or a mix of both, like variety farming. But you do not mix goals inside one tired session. That's how you keep the endgame cool, calm and focused. What about the drops? You don't ignore them, of course. You just don't stop your sessions to analyze them every time. Collect first, decide later. For example, I have a stash tab labeled check later. Everything maybe good goes there. Everything else gets salvaged fast. And at the end of the session, if you still have mental energy and time, you review shortly. This removes the biggest endgame trap, decision fatigue. And with this idea in mind, we now build the ladder of power, because priorities depend on where your build is right now. Chapter 3, the power ladder. Power does not come from one single source. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings in the Diablo 4 endgame. Many players treat power like it's only about gear, like everything comes down to finding the perfect item. But power is layered. And understanding those layers is what allows you to progress calmly, instead of chasing upgrades blindly. So let's slow this down. Your character's power is built from multiple systems working together. Those systems include your build setup, your glyphs, your paragon structure, resource investments, your gear quality, your masterworking discipline. None of these exist in isolation. And none of them are equally important at all times. And that's the key. A lot of players treat the endgame like one big loot hunt. They believe that if I just find better gear, everything else will fall into place. And sometimes that's true, of course. But very often, especially in early and mid-endgame, gear is not the biggest source of power. In fact, many of the biggest power jumps comes from things that feel boring, things that don't drop with flashy effects, things like your glyph progression, your correct FX priorities, correct stats, and of course the optimal aspects. Only after those are in place does perfect gear really start to matter slowly. This is why so many players also feel stuck. They are looking for power in the wrong layer. They are farming gear when their build would benefit more from glyph power, for example, or optimizing their paragon structure, or better stat distribution. So instead of chasing everything at once, we need a framework. So let's build the power ladder step by step. This ladder is not about being right, it's about being practical. You don't climb all steps at once. You climb the next step that makes sense. Step 1. Your build works. This sounds obvious, right? But it's more important than people realize. At this step, your skills make sense together, your key aspects are active, your defenses function, your character is playable without constant stress. You don't need perfect rolls, you don't need optimized stats, you need functionality here. If your build does not work, nothing else matters. Many players try to skip this step. They rush into optimization of gear, of stats, stuff that they don't really need at this point, because their core setup is still unstable. This of course creates frustration. So before worrying about numbers, ask yourself a simple question. Does my build feel stable? If the answer is no, this is where your focus belongs for now. Step 2. Glyph power. Glyphs are one of the most boring systems in the game, but also at the same time one of the most reliable. Glyph power scales your entire build. It doesn't care about RNG too much and doesn't care about luck, right? It rewards time and consistency. Glyph progression is powerful because it multiplies everything else. Better gear becomes better, better paragon becomes better, better scaling becomes better. And yet many players delay glyph progression because it doesn't feel exciting. But this is a mistake. Glyphs are foundational power. If you neglect them, you will feel weaker than you should be, no matter how good your gear looks. Step 3. Paragon coherence. Notice the word here is not perfection, it's coherence. Paragon does not need to be optimized to the last node to be effective. And you also don't need Paragon 300 every season. At this step, your boards supports your build, your paths are intentional, and your scaling stats are emphasized. You are not hunting for perfect routing yet. You are simply making sure your paragons isn't fighting against your build. A coherent paragon setup often gives more power than a random but optimized one copied without understanding. Step 4. Good enough gear everywhere. This step is where many players lose discipline, because gear is tempting. Shiny drops, numbers going up, potential upgrades everywhere, left and right. But good enough gear is not about perfection, it's about coverage and stability. At this step you want the correct stats in every slot, reasonable rolls, no big weaknesses or dump stats, and the correct affixes and aspects in every slot. You don't need god rolls, you don't need perfect affixes, you don't need a quadruple GA item, you need consistency. This is the step where your build starts to feel smooth, and smoothness is more important than raw numbers, at least for now. So let's go on to step 5. Masterwork only what deserves it. And this is where discipline matters. Masterworking feels good, it feels like progress. But masterworking the wrong item or items is one of the fastest ways to just waste resources. At this step you ask yourself, will this item stay with me for a while? If the answer is no, you don't invest deeply. You resist the urge to polish temporary gear, because temporary gear is meant to be temporary. This restraint is what separates calm progression from constant frustration. Step 6. Min-maxing. This is the final step, and it's optional. Min-maxing is where upgrades are small but expensive. This is where perfect rolls matter, tiny improvements matter, and optimization becomes granular. This step is not for everyone. This is the end game of the end games, right? But that's also okay. If you reach this step and enjoy it, great. If you don't, you can stop earlier and still be very powerful. The game does not require perfection. Why does all of this matter? Because if you are on step 2, for example, and spend all your time acting like you're on step 6, you will feel stuck. You will feel unlucky, you will blame RNG, you will blame the game, but the problem is not the game. The problem is that you are using the wrong machines for the step you are in, basically. You are farming min-max gear when your build would gain more from glyph power, for example. And once you understand this ladder structure, decisions become easier. You stop asking what is the best thing overall and start asking what is the best thing for my current step I am in. This shift will remove pressure because power is contextual. Power is not absolute. An upgrade that is amazing for one player might be meaningless for another because they are on different steps of the ladder. So comparing yourself constantly to others is rarely useful. What matters is whether you are climbing your next step. I know this was a lot, so let's gently recap this chapter. Power comes from layers, not one source. The power ladder, how I like to call it, is firstly, your build works. Second, glyph power. Third, paragon coherence. Fourth, good enough gear everywhere. Fifth, masterworking discipline. And then the last ladder is our min-maxing. If you feel stuck, you are probably farming the wrong step. Not because you are bad, but because your focus is maybe a little bit misaligned. And now that we understand power and priorities, we can finally talk about machines. We are going into which activities are best for which outcomes. Because once you map machines to goals, the end game becomes simple. And that's where we are going next. Chapter 4. What each activity is for. Now that we understand the so-called power ladder, we can finally talk about activities. Because activities are tools. They are not goals by themselves, they are machines. And when you use the right machine for the right job, the end game becomes much simpler. One of the biggest mistakes players make is treating all endgame activities as equally important. Trust me, they are not. Each activity exists for a specific purpose. And when you understand that purpose, you stop feeling like you are missing out. So let's build what I call a machine map. This is not about ranking activities as good or bad, it's about understanding what each one is meant to do. Here is a simplified machine map we'll use for the entire video. We have nightmare dungeons, which are giving us resources, experience, some kind of variety, and can be seen as a general farming spot. Then we have the pit, of course, glyph experience and consistent, predictable progression. Infernal hordes. Here we have good resource flow and a little bit of decision-based efficiency and potentially big output sessions, linked to a little bit of RNG, of course. Then we have the Hell Tides. Here we can farm targeted materials, a little bit of supplemental loot, and it is good as a kind of chilled side farming in my opinion. And then we have the Uber bossing, where we can farm targeted loot, which is but also heavily season dependent. For example, when you need specific uniques, you need to go to boss XYZ and so on. The thing is, each of these machines shines of course in a different context. None of them need to be done at all the time. That's where many players go wrong. A common mindset is, I should probably do a bit of everything each day. This sounds reasonable, kind of, right? It sounds balanced and in some way also efficient. But in practice, this kind of mindset creates chaos. Because each activity has a different rhythm, a different mental load, and a different setup. Switching between them constantly forces your brain to reset over and over again. And this will drain energy faster than difficulty, for example, ever could. The endgame becomes cooler and calmer for you the moment you accept this truth. You don't need to do everything every day. You don't need to touch every activity every day. You rotate activities based on what your character needs right now. That's it. Right now, in the present moment. For example, let's start with Nightmare Dungeons. Nightmare Dungeons are the most flexible activity in the endgame, I would say. They are not extreme, they are not super specialized, and they sit somewhere in the middle. Nightmare Dungeons are best used if you need steady experience, general resources, material accumulation, if you want to test new builds, or add a little bit variety to your gameplay, right? They are pretty familiar, predictable and somewhat comfortable. This makes them perfect for just warming up in your sessions, longer casual sessions, or days when you don't want to think too much. They are not meant to be hyper efficient at one thing. They are meant to give you a bit of everything, kind of. And if you treat Nightmare Dungeons as a catch-all farming mode, they work beautifully. If you expect them to be the best source of everything, then of course they disappoint. With that said, let's come to the pits. The pit has of course a much narrower purpose, and that's a good thing. The pit exists primarily for glyph experience and steady, predictable progression. Unlike many other systems in the game, glyph XP does not rely on RNG. You know exactly what you are getting. That makes the pit the most reliable machine in the endgame basically. It is of course best used when you want guaranteed progress, measurable gains, and invest your time efficiently. It's not about loot excitement, it's not about variety, it's just about consistency and efficiency. If you feel like your power is lagging behind your time investment, the pit is oftentimes the answer. Try to really get your glyphs on a higher level. I would say all 5 that you use in your Paragon board on at least 80 plus. Let's talk about the Infernal Hordes, the flow and output machine. Infernal Hordes are a little bit different of course. They are not difficult content for most endgame builds. They are management content basically. Infernal Hordes test your decision making, your pacing a little bit, and your ability to maintain flow over the course of the 10 waves, right? This mode shines when your build is already functional, you can clear quickly, and you want high output sessions. Infernal Hordes reward good choices, minimal downtime, and momentum. They punish hesitation and waiting, kind of. So this is a mode you do when you're awake, focused, and ready to commit to a run or two. Not when you're half tired and distracted optimally. Used correctly, Infernal Hordes feel smooth and satisfying. Used poorly, they feel chaotic and draining. But they can reward a high amount of resources at the end, depending of course on how much ether you farmed throughout the run. Perfect resource farming machine, which also gives you good Paragon XP. With that said, let's move on to Helltides. This is what I call the supplemental machine. Helltide is best thought of as a supplemental content. It's not your main engine. It's something you plug in when it fits your goals. For example, when you want to do some fast whispers or just a little bit of lazy spot farming. It is good when you also want to target some materials, specific crafting needs, a little bit of side farming and occasional loot spikes. But Helltides in general are rarely optimal as a main focus for longer sessions. We all know that, especially in the endgame. Treat it as a tool, not as an obligation. If you ignore Helltides for days, nothing bad will happen. And that's an important realization. Let's talk about the Uber bossing, the targeted loot machine. Bossing is the most misunderstood activity. Many players treat bossing like the core of the endgame. But in my opinion, it's not. Bossing is best used when you're chasing a specific item, you know exactly what you want and need, and when you are prepared for that RNG of course. Bossing is not steady, it is spiky. We all know that. You might get everything quickly or nothing at all. That makes it naturally unsuitable as a primary progression loop, but very effective as a targeted tool. You don't of course pick one activity forever. You rotate between machines based on your current ladder step, your current goal, and your available energy. One week you might focus heavily on the pit. I mean, one session, one day, or maybe even 1 week, depends hardly of course on your available game time. Another day or week you focus on Nightmare Dungeons. Another day or week on Infernal Hordes, and so on and so forth. This rotation keeps the game fresh for you without really sacrificing efficiency. and more importantly, it keeps you motivated and sane. And here's a calm truth that surprises many players. The more you simplify your loop, the faster your progress becomes, because you remove any kind of setup time, decision making, and unnecessary mental friction. You spend more time playing and less time thinking about what to play. The end game becomes peaceful when you stop trying to optimize everything at once. So again, this was a chapter with a lot of information, so let's recap it. Each activity is a machine. Nightmare Dungeons give you a general farming, resources, experience, and a little bit of variety. The Pit gives you glyph experience and your most predictable progress. Infernal Hordes give you high output sessions and flow based rewards, depending on how well you cleared them and how you choose the Banes, for example, and with how much ether you ended at the end. The Helltides give you supplemental materials and can be seen as a little bit of a side farming thing, also for gear. And the Uber Bossing gives you very specific loot goals. You do not need all of them every day. You rotate them intentionally. And the more intentional your loop becomes, the calmer and more effective your endgame feels. Now that we have mapped out these machines, we can go on with the next chapter, which is the most interesting one for most players, I would say. What to ignore and how to build a cool and calm loop. One of the hardest skills in the Diablo 4 endgame is not knowing what to do, it's knowing what to ignore. The game constantly offers you options, activities, timers, events, constant flow of drops. All of them ask for your attention, right? And attention is your most limited resource. So learning to ignore things is not laziness, it's really mastery. Ignoring something feels wrong at first. You worry that you're missing out, you're playing inefficiently, and you should be doing more. But the truth is the opposite. Most burnout comes from over-participation. Doing too many things, thinking too much, and switching up stuff constantly. A cool, collected and calm endgame is built on subtraction. Let's name the biggest traps clearly. Not to shame them, but to really recognize them. Because once you see them, they lose power. First one, staying too long in town. Keep this in mind, town is lava. Town feels safe, it feels productive, but town does not make you stronger. Every minute in town is a minute not converting time into power basically. Should see town as a little checkpoint, a pit stop, but not a workspace. If you live in town, progress slows quietly. The second one, we talked about this already, checking every item. Checking items feels responsible, but most items are not worth deep attention. Every time you stop to analyze an item mid-session, you break momentum, and momentum is fragile. This is why stash now, decide later is so powerful. Rerolling mediocre gear. Rerolling feels like progress. Numbers change, gold and mods are spent, but rerolling gear you will soon replace is one of the biggest hidden drains in the endgame. It feels productive but creates nothing lasting long term. Farming tiers that are too low. Low risk content feels comfortable, but comfort without growth is stagnation. If content no longer challenges your build at all, it is probably too low to be your main focus. That doesn't mean you never do it, it means you don't live there. Switching activities constantly. You should know this by now. Switching feels flexible. In reality, it creates chaos. Every activity switch resets your mindset, rhythm, and maybe even your goals. Chasing timers instead of goals. Timers feel urgent, but urgency is not importance. If you let timers decide your session, you lose control of your loop. Your goals should come first, timers should maybe serve them or be ignored. Let's talk about the town is lava concept again, because this one is really the one which is killing most players' times. And I want to give you an abstract idea kind of to internalize. Every time you go to town, you pay a tax. not in gold, but in momentum. If you pay the tax too often, your progress goes bankrupt. So instead of I go to town whenever I feel like it, you decide I go to town every X amount of runs. You can even run around with a full stash where you ignore drops that are coming on your way and still finish your runs. No worries. Most of the items, not all of them, but most of them will be transferred to your stash normally, and you can still pick them up and salvage them anyways. So don't go to town after, I don't know, every second run or something to clear out your stash. You just teleport out and teleport into the next activity again, right? This one rule alone can double your effective progress speed. Okay, why can all this feel uncomfortable at first? Because ignoring things feels naturally like resistance. You will think, I should check this, I should do that. But once you push through that discomfort, sessions become lighter. You stop carrying mental weight you don't need. Once you know what to ignore, structure becomes easy. Because structure is simply choosing a few things and repeating them calmly and with intention over and over again. Randomness feels flexible, but structure feels safe, and safety keeps you playing longer. Now let's turn this philosophy into something practical. Not a rigid schedule, not a checklist, just some kind of templates that you can use. Let's build, for example, a weekly loop. I know, daily planning is exhausting, but if you have an overarching weekly structure, it is more calming. You don't wake up each day asking, what should I do today? You already know, and this removes friction. For example, the 1 hour per day players, like who are coming from work and have only limited time for the game and who want to just play it with not too much stress, but also feel progress. That means in your first day you could decide, okay, today I'm only doing the pit for glyph XP. For your second day, you aim for nightmare dungeons, because you need resources and a little bit of variety. Then on your third day, you only focus on infernal hordes, to again stack up your resources, maybe get some good gear and get also some lucky runs with a high output potential. And day 4, you're focusing on crafting or masterworking your gear, which also may be added up now in your stash. Short, focused sessions, and this loop you can repeat week after week, how it fits into your schedule and gaming sessions. Notice something important here. You are not doing everything every day, but each session has a purpose for you. And that's why this also works so well, right? You have each day a specific goal, you use only one machine that we talked about earlier, and your session ends cleanly. You know what you got and what you planned out for. There is no overlap, no confusion. You always know why you logged in and when you are done. Of course, the same philosophy goes for high time loop players, you could say. The difference is just volume, not really the structure. You still rotate the pits, the nightmares, infernal hordes and the crafting, for example. But you just do more of each, of course. The structure basically stays the same, and this structure also scales. Chaos at the end does not. Why does structure beat randomness? Random play feels free, but as we all know at this point, it creates also friction. Structure feels limiting until you realize it removes decision fatigue. Once your structure is in place, you can relax basically. You are no longer fighting the game, you flow with it. And your real goal at the end is not efficiency, it is sustainability. A loop that you can enjoy and you can maintain, which doesn't exhaust you on the long run. That's how your seasons are actually completed. Of course, there are streamers out there and a lot of people think of efficiency and this and that, which is completely fine, right? But it is a difference if you play this game for 8 hours a day or an hour here and there, right? So your focus and your mindset should also shift according to that. So let's recap this chapter. Ignoring things is a skill. Your biggest traps are often too much town time. Don't forget, town is lava. Too much item checking, constant switching of activities or goals maybe, or even chasing timers. like Legion events or world bosses or whatnot. Town has attacks, pay it less often. And don't forget, structure beats randomness. Your weekly loops reduce friction, and calm and collected progress always beats chaotic intensity. Now that we have stripped all the noise away, we are ready to bring our endgame loop to the next level together. If you are still watching and listening, thank you for being here. Whether you watched actively or let it all play in the background, I hope it will make your endgame in the future easier for you. And if you are interested in more Diablo content like this, you will find it on my channel, to which you should subscribe now. After you've done that, you can watch this video next for more Diablo 4 content. See you there.